A very good evening. It's 7:05 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to the programme. Now, in the first hour of the programme, we're joined by Stephen Flynn, who is the new leader of the SNP in Westminster, also SNP MP for Aberdeen South. We're streaming this as well, so you can watch live on Global Player. It's your chance to put your questions to Stephen over the next hour. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850. And you can use Alexa as well. Just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC and your question will appear on my screen. Now, there's lots to talk about. Obviously, we can talk about Scottish independence. That is, after all, I imagine why Stephen wanted to be leader of the SNP in Westminster. I don't want to promote you yet, Stephen. But, I mean, feel free to ask about anything you want to do with politics in Scotland or indeed the whole of the United Kingdom. You've been in the job, 6 weeks now?
Yeah.
Is it what you thought it would be like?
I am absolutely loving it, yeah. I think it is everything I thought it would be like. There's obviously a significant amount of pressure, there's a significant amount of interest in me as an individual, which is a little bit bizarre, because I just see myself as a bit of a normal bloke. But yeah, no, I've been enjoying it. And, you know, the opportunity to hold the UK government to account at this crucial time is something which I think most folk in Scotland and up and down the UK would love the opportunity to do. We're not exactly short of talking points at the moment, are we? So.
Well, you had a baptism of fire last week, didn't you, with the Gender Recognition Reform Act blocking.
Indeed.
And I watched that entire debate and it was quite something.
Yeah, I mean, it put front and...
I am that sad.
You're not alone. I think one or two others might have watched. But, you know, it put it front and centre as to how this UK setup is at the moment. We have a UK government which, of course, when it came to Brexit, denied the people of Scotland their view. We obviously voted to remain, and they took us out of the European Union. Our democracy didn't matter. When it comes to a number of elections we've had now in Scotland, concurrent results that the SNP has won on a mandate of a second independence referendum. And of course on this issue with the Scottish Parliament, not just the SNP but the Labour Party, the Greens, the Tories, the Lib Dems and indeed members of the SNP voted in favour of legislation. We won by 2/3 majority, but the UK government have said Scotland's democracy doesn't matter again. So no matter which way we turn, we're getting denied.
I mean, I want to let the listeners ask you the questions, and I'm sure there will be questions on this, but just on that, that's a bit of hyperbole, isn't it? Because what they did was they enforced part of the Scotland Act, which the SNP voted for at the time, when you were in short pants, I imagine. It is quite clear that there is an effect on UK-wide equality legislation. And the lawyers seem to agree with that.
No, I would dispute that. I don't think it is quite clear that there's an impact on UK-wide equality legislation. Indeed, Caroline Noakes, a very esteemed member of the Conservative Party, would seem to agree with me on that point. Now, obviously, that's going to be debated over the next few weeks and months, and probably end up in the courts for them to determine whether that's the case or not. But the bill was very explicit on the face of it that it didn't intercede with the UK Equalities Act. Many of the provisions within it are just provisions that are already the case at the moment but have been extended or changed slightly. But it was good. It was a good thing. And, you know, when the Scottish Parliament was put together, it was based upon the consensus politics, bringing together different parties, bringing together different political views.
That's worked out well, hasn't it?
Oh, indeed it did. It did. This bill is an example of that, where all the parties came together and a 2/3 majority voted in favour of the bill, and the UK government have said no. And as far as I'm aware, they've not outlined why beyond the statement of reasons. Alistair Jack it's been said to Alistair Jack, if you want to come up to Scotland's Parliament and tell us what we need to change to make this work, and he said, well, it's for the Scottish Government to bring forward. I'm sorry, but he's the one that's saying it can't go ahead. He needs to open his door and tell us what needs to change. My suggestion is he doesn't want it to change because it's a part of a cultural war for the Conservative Party.
When you were standing up questioning him and then the emergency debate was granted, you were faced with a situation where you were having to make a speech on a piece of paper that you hadn't actually seen.
Yeah, exactly. It was utterly bizarre. You know, the UK government, which is, for the first time ever, told us that we can't move legislation that's been agreed in the Scottish Parliament brought forward a statement of reasons, but they did it as I was on my feet in the House of Commons. All protocols appeared to have been thrown out the window. I did get the opportunity to read it subsequent to the debate, and it was probably the flimsiest piece of procedure I've ever seen. There was bits in it that inferred that this can't go forward because the government's IT system can't deal with a couple of hundred folk being added to it who may happen to be trans. I mean, if that's the strength of their argument, then bring on the court, because I think they're going to be in for a bit of an embarrassing situation.
Right, let's go to your calls. Let's go to Kundan, who is in Canterbury. Hello, Kundan.
Hi, thanks,
About as far
Ian.
away from Scotland as you can get.
Yes, pretty much. Hi, Ian. Hello, Stephen. Good to speak to you. Stephen, I'm a naturalised British citizen. When I came to the UK, I didn't come to England. I didn't come to Scotland. I came to the United Kingdom. I chose to relinquish my erstwhile Indian citizenship to become a British citizen. So my question is, are you and your lot of one-trick ponies, are you guys delusional when the UK government and the Supreme Court has ruled over and very clearly said what they have? You guys still carry on saying that. That is point one. Point two, I'm a business person. I run businesses in England and Scotland. And so whatever happens to Scotland impacts me directly. So my question very pointedly is, why would the English and the Northern Irish and the Welsh, why should we all not have a say in Scotland's independence? I think we have an absolutely equal say in what happens to Scotland because it impacts us as well.
Okay, a lot to unpack there, Kundan. But I think in terms of your first point in relation to Scotland's democracy, do I think that democracy ended when the UK Supreme Court came forward with its decision? No, I don't believe it did, and I don't think anyone on these islands should accept that as the case, because if we believe in democracy, then we believe in the ability for people to change their mind, every 5 years when it comes to elections, or indeed a little bit sooner when it comes to UK Parliament elections, because they seem to come around a little bit more often.
The big constitutional issue is different, though.
No, but I was waiting to come on to that. But there was, of course, an enormous change since the last Scottish independence referendum in 2014, and that is that we were promised that we would be within the European Union, and that we were promised we would lead the UK going forward. Neither of those things has happened. We've been taken out of the European Union against our will. Our access, you're a businessman, our access to the European single market and customs union was taken away from us. Our ability to move freely across the continent was taken away from us, and the damage that is causing in Scotland at the moment is huge, in particular for businesses, but also for our public sector as well, because we don't have access to the same labour pool that we otherwise would have, and that's of course impacting
cheap labour pool, you mean?
Not cheap at all. People would have been paid the same as anyone else in Scotland. But the point is, when it comes to our public sector, many of the pressures that are there on social care and in our health service are because we don't have the range of people that we otherwise would have had. So there's been a big constitutional shift in the UK since the last independence referendum, and I believe in democracy, and I believe in the right of the people of Scotland to determine their own future. Indeed, the claim of right, which is oft spoke about, which the UK government agrees with, obviously outlines our ability to have that independence referendum, should we so have it. It's now for the people of Scotland to decide when that happens, and hopefully that'll be at the next general election. And I'm more than happy to talk about that if that's of interest. On your second point in relation to who gets to vote in determining Scotland's future, it's the people who live and work in Scotland. I think that's a fairly reasonable position to take. I'm not hearing a clamour for that to change. I think there would be a very dangerous moment if that was to change. But you're more than welcome to come and join us, Kundan, in Scotland. I'm sure you would be most welcome.
But I mean, if my grandfather, well, in fact, my grandfather was Scottish citizen, born in Scotland, lived all of his life until the last 20 years in Ayrshire, then came down to England, met my grandmother, and hence I'm here today. That qualifies me to play football for Scotland. Obviously, that's never going to happen, but it could have done. If I can play football for Scotland, and basically they do need some good players, don't they? Why couldn't I vote in a referendum which could see the United Kingdom breaking up?
Because this is a matter for the people of Scotland. It's for them to determine what their future is, and that is the people who live and work in our wee small nation. decision. I've got family members from Scotland who have moved down to England, and I'm sure they would love the opportunity to vote as well. I'm not sure they would necessarily vote in the way I would like them to vote, by the way.
That's the reason. That's the reason why you won't allow them to, isn't it?
Don't be silly.
Of course it is.
No, nobody's suggesting that anyone outside of Scotland should be able to interfere in Scotland's democratic decision making. Nobody reasonable or serious is doing that.
But the fact is that it would mean the end of the United Kingdom as it is, and therefore I think there are a lot of people in England who feel that they should have a vote. Now, it may be that the majority would vote to say, OK, Scotland, you want to go, off you go. I don't know how that would turn out.
Couldn't you imagine the uproar if the people of Germany had said during the Brexit campaign, well, you know what, you're breaking up our European Union, so we should be able to vote as well. I mean, we're not being serious.
I think they would have voted to chuck us out, frankly.
I think they might have done, yeah.
Kundan, do you want a brief comeback?
Well, yeah, as with all politicians, Stephen, you've tried to outmaneuver and not answer either of my questions. But anyways, the fundamental point is when something impacts us in England, we should also have the right to vote on that. And you have the balls to compare the United Kingdom to our relationship with the European Union. These are two completely different things. The European Union was formed, 30, 40, 50 years ago out of the European community, and this is a 300-plus-year-old relationship between England and Scotland. So the comparison just does not work, and anything that happens to Scotland impacts the rest of us because we are one family. You guys are the only separatists that don't believe in it, but the rest of the country believes in us.
I don't think we're perhaps the only independent seekers on these islands. I think that would be unfair to Plaid Cymru, and there's a small political party in Northern Ireland as well who I think are quite keen on gaining their reunity with the rest of Ireland. So I don't think that's necessarily a fair assertion, but I think it's probably fair to say we're going to agree to disagree on the wider point.
I think that probably is fair. But just on the European Union point, this is something I've talked to Nicola Sturgeon about, Ian Blackford. I just want to hear your view on this. I don't understand. I understand the whole concept of Scottish independence. I get it. What I don't understand is if you want to be truly independent, why would you then want to sign up to the European Union?
Because I don't think I think the two are interlinked. I mean, we want Scotland's place in the world, and Scotland's place in the world, as we see it as proud Europeans, is within the European Union. We want to have a seat at the top table. We want to be able.
But why not within the United Kingdom as well?
I would love it for the rest of the United Kingdom to join us back in the European Union.
No, I think it's what I meant. You know that's not what I meant.
I think it's very unlikely that's going to be the case. But no, I'm very keen for Scotland's place to be in Europe. I think the people of Scotland are as well. 72% in the last opinion poll wanted Scotland to rejoin the European Union, and there's a number of factors behind that, some of which I've explained already. As a younger person
understand
as
that.
well, I've always seen Scotland
legitimate argument about sort of, well, we're not members of the single market anymore, therefore the economy is being damaged because of that. But the single market of the United Kingdom to the Scottish economy is far more important than the single market of the European Union.
Well, that would have been the case for our near neighbours across the water in Ireland many years ago, and of course, look how their economy is booming now in comparison to the UK's. Now, there's going to be pros and cons. Scottish independence. I don't think anyone is dressing up.
What percentage of Scottish exports go to England, Wales, and Northern Ireland?
There's I think it's not 60 or 70%.
85%.
Yeah, but most of it travels through as well to go elsewhere. And what we're talking about there is a number of different goods. But of course, what we are seeking to do, and this is the important point, we are seeking to join a single market of 500 odd million people. We're seeking to expand Scotland's horizons, and we're hoping that people of Europe would want to come in and expand their horizons by coming to Scotland.
Whether the EU would allow you in, which we may come on to. Lots of questions coming in. Keep your calls coming at 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 7.
LBC Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 21 minutes past 7. We're talking to Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader in Westminster and MP for Aberdeen South. Let's go to Dean in Glasgow. Hello, Dean.
Hi there. How you doing?
Hi.
Dean, how are we doing?
Yeah, what I would like to ask is, I was at the time of the referendum back in 2014. I was 18, and I was out on the streets, knocking on the doors, campaigning for independence for Scotland. And then shortly after that, like many people in Scotland, decided to join the SNP. Unfortunately, when I look forward to, I was only in the party for around about a year, because it was quite clear that it was a party who were starting to become obsessed with identity politics, and rather than having sort of a normal, sensible debates about subjects, they were just overly focused on the optics. I would ask Stephen, does he think that the party are disproportionately focused on identity politics issues? And I support the GRA forms, by the way. It's not specifically speaking about that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Again, a lot to unpack there. Do I think the party is disproportionately focused on identity politics? No, I think it's a big part of society. I think we should be talking about these things. You've probably noticed, if you've been watching, that I spend most of my time talking about the cost of living crisis, the just transition that needs to happen in our energy sector, the damage being done by Brexit and the opportunities of rejoining the European Union, Scotland's constitutional future, the importance of our democracy, many things, and that's true of my colleagues as well. There's a number of issues in the UK at this moment in time which need to be highlighted, not least the stuff in the last day or two in relation to the Conservative Party. You know, we've got a Prime Minister who promised, professionalism, integrity and accountability. If you look at his short tenure, you've had Gavin Williamson, who had to go because of bullying. Dominic Raab has got 8 allegations of bullying against him, if I remember correctly. You have Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who was gone and then came back despite concerns in relation to national security. You now have the former Chancellor and now Chairman of the Conservative Party embroiled in tax scandal in relation to his own finances and the lack of transparency. And of course you've got the former Prime Minister, bar one, Boris Johnson, who appears to be very cosy with the chair of the BBC. So
you would have to admit
a number of issues to look at.
This current administration is probably slightly more professional than the previous two.
Well, I think it's a pretty low bar in that regard, is it not? I don't think that's to put any praise on Rishi Sunak, but that's just a highlight of the last few months of this UK government. So no, these are the things that we talk about, but there's rightly a place for social issues as well, and I'm glad to hear that you're in favour of the GRC bill, which of course received overwhelming support in Scotland's Parliament.
You just returned the SNP whip to Patrick Grady, one of your MPs who sexually harassed a staff member. That doesn't exactly send the right message, does it?
So I think it's important that I go through exactly what happened in relation to Patrick. So the Parliament, the independent authorities, found that Patrick had touched inappropriately a staff member on the head, neck and shoulder, and he was given a 2-day suspension from Parliament for that. The SNP group at the time, this was back in June or July, gave Patrick a suspension, I think, of around a week as well. At that time, as I understand it, Patrick was put into administrative suspension from the SNP, and he was referred by the National Secretary to the Member Conduct Committee, at which point he was given a 6-month suspension from the party. That suspension ended over the Christmas period, and as such Patrick became a member of the Scottish National Party at that moment. And like all members of the Scottish National Party, he has a right to sit as an elected councillor, an elected MSP or an elected MP as he is.
You didn't have to bring him back into the parliamentary party, though.
There's nothing within the rules in any way, shape or form that would prevent me from having a member of the Scottish National Party sitting within our group. But, you know, Patrick is extremely remorseful for what happened, and what happened, in my view, was bang out of order, completely unacceptable in any workplace.
I suppose my point is that if this was a Conservative MP, I suspect that you and your colleagues would be saying that they should not be brought back into the Conservative whip. I mean, let's face it, there's plenty of Conservatives that haven't got the whip at the moment, so we might test that out soon.
Well, I've lost quite a few. I've lost count of how many Tories don't have the whip at the moment. You'll need to
8.
Is it 8? You know more than I do in that regard. But it's right and fair that we are questioned in relation to these things, which is why I've set out the timeline of events there. It's obviously an extremely serious situation that took place, and I don't think anyone sought to underplay that. I've certainly not sought to underplay that at any point during my short tenure.
Thank you, Dean. Let's go to Stephen in Airdrie. Hello, Stephen.
Good evening. Yeah, so in Stephen and the SNP like to use Brexit as a material change that justifies a second referendum, but the 2014 Yes campaign entailed a loss of EU membership. So how can the loss of EU membership in September 2014 be a price worth paying for independence? Then suddenly, a mere 21 months later, June 2016, how can it suddenly be a material change for another referendum? I find that...
I wish I'd thought of that one, Stephen.
Hiya, Stephen, how are you doing?
Airdrie, point for a while, but nobody else has.
Stephen, how are you doing? Airdrie, a lovely part of the world, somewhere I know well. Look, I don't think anyone would argue that the Scottish National Party is the most pro-European party on these islands. You can quibble about what you think that might have meant in 2014, but...
Well, it would have meant that.
No, it wouldn't have. We
would.
We would have acceded into the European Union. Of course we would have.
Possibly in the end,
no.
But you would have had to join the euro. You would have had to guarantee that Scottish public debt was under 3%, which, what is it now?
That's
9%?
You know that. You're a very esteemed broadcaster, and you know that's not the case. That wasn't true of Croatia, of course, when they joined the European Union. I think, if I remember correctly, their debt was sitting somewhere around 6%, and of course they didn't need to take on the euro.
Yours is more than
as you're suggesting, but you said under 3%, which is not
that
true
is the
in
rule.
relation.
I mean, that is the rule
in relation to Croatia. It's not a rule as set out by the.
It may not be a rule that they always abide by, but that's what they're supposed to abide by, which is part of the reason that we left, because they just break the rules when it suits them.
Nonsense. They make good rules. It's just the UK is trying to tear them all up with the bonfire that happened last week in Parliament.
But Stephen is right, though. Leaving the UK would have meant initially leaving the EU, and you would then have had to negotiate a re-entry.
But we would have been been on a pathway back into the European Union. Nobody can tell me at this moment in time that we're on a pathway back into the European Union. We're on the highway away from the European Union, and we're never going back, whether it's Keir Starmer or indeed Rishi Sunak or perhaps Boris Johnson, who's back in the hot seat. So no, I don't accept the premise of that, Stephen. And ultimately, as it stands, and I think this is a fair comment for me to make, and I'm sure it's one that Iain and everyone would accept, we are the main party on these islands who are promoting Scotland's place in Europe, and unashamedly so, and we'll continue to do so.
OK, we'll have more from Stephen Flynn, the Westminster Leader of the SNP, in just a few moments. 0345 6060 973. It's 7:30. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC from Amelia Cox.
Labour says Nadhim Zahawi's position as Conservative Party chairman is untenable following a tax dispute with HMRC. Rishi Sunak has asked his independent ethics advisor to investigate the error, which Nadhim Zahawi says was careless but not deliberate. A woman's being questioned on suspicion of murder and robbery after a man died in Gloucestershire. He was taken to hospital after being found unresponsive in a Tesco car park in Stroud early on Sunday morning. And after less than a year in charge. Frank Lampard has been sacked as Everton manager. The club are 19th in the Premier League and are 10 games without a win. LBC weather, patchy light rain for some areas tonight. Clear spells elsewhere with cloud increasing in the southeast, a low of -4 degrees.
This is LBC.
Only.
Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
7:33 on LBC. Stephen Flynn, the SNP Westminster Leader, is with us taking your calls, tweets and texts. Fiona has probably the most challenging question so far. Stephen, have you been to Millport and gone round the island on a bike?
I don't think so. Not knowingly.
Well, that's one to correct. Right, let's go to Gareth in Matlock in Derbyshire. Hello, Gareth.
Yeah, good evening, Ian. Nice to speak to you. Nice to speak to you as well, Stephen.
Hi, Gareth.
A shout out for you, because being a politician and representing people is, it's a good thing. So, and democracy is a good thing.
Thank you.
A question from me to you as an Englishman living in Derbyshire, because we hear a lot, Ian Blackford, we've had him all the time, standing in Westminster, putting the point of view for the Scottish independence. But if you were to obtain that, you as the new leader, because you'll be coming to Westminster asking for it and being slightly antagonistic towards English and Westminster and all that type of thing. But what would be your mission statement, and what would you do for Scotland when you detached yourself from us? As an Englishman, I think it's democracy. It should be given to the people who live in Scotland. Whoever lives in Scotland. But what would you do? What would the SNP's next step be in your mission statement?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. Just to pick up on one thing before I get into it, in terms of being antagonistic towards English members of Parliament and the like, I don't necessarily think that would be the case or needs to be the case. There's quite a mix of folk and personalities across the benches in Westminster, and when Scotland does become independent, we're going to have a good relationship with the rest of the key UK, our friends in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. That's extremely important to me, and I know it's important to all my colleagues as well. In terms of what the future for Scotland looks like, and I'm a little bit biased in this because I come from the northeast of Scotland, I want Scotland to lead the world on the green renewable future that I think that we're going to have. Now, our energy energy base in Scotland at the moment is enormous. When we look at what's to come in relation to offshore wind, onshore wind, tidal, hydro pump storage, and hopefully utilising that abundance of excess electricity, of which there's going to be a fair amount, to lead the hydrogen revolution as well. I think it's an exciting time. And part of that process is going to be about harnessing jobs and opportunities in Scotland, but also exporting that skills and expertise across the globe. It's something that we've been very good at in relation to the existing fossil fuel sector, and it's something which I think will be exceptional at as an independent, agile, small nation working within the European Union. That's my big pitch, being a little bit biased from the northeast of Scotland. But it also, and this is an important point when we're talking about that green renewable future, the abundance of renewable energy that Scotland has also affords us something that everyone would love to have, and that's a competitive advantage for business, because not only will they be able to site themselves in Scotland knowing that there's that abundance of energy, we can hopefully make sure that it's clean, green and ultimately affordable as well. And I think that's an exciting and enticing prospect for business who may want to look at where they're based in the future. So there's a big positive vision there, and of course that's built around our membership of the European Union.
In 2014, part of the argument was, well, Scotland has all this oil, so we're all going to be fine, and if the oil price remains as it is today, that's going to be crucial to the Scottish economy. Well, of course, now you're understandably talking about renewables. Oil is taken on, I mean, it's almost been written out of the equation. Surely it's still important, though, in terms of balancing the books in Scotland.
Well, if we look at I would challenge that, because if we look at the economy paper, which the Scottish Government released, there's obviously a number of papers which have been released so far building towards what an independent Scotland would look like. It would be harnessing some of that revenue from Scotland's North Sea oil and gas sector to help power that transition. I think that's an exciting and enticing prospect, as I've said. But if I may just reflect upon the energy sector again for a minute, when it comes to Scotland's North Sea and the money that's came from that, the UK Treasury has raked in near £400 billion from Scotland's North Sea oil and gas sector, and yet communities in Scotland are fuel poor, despite our nation being fuel rich. That's an absurdity, and it's happened entirely on Westminster's watch.
But as the MP for one of the Aberdeen constituencies, I mean, you are in a slightly tricky position here, aren't you? Because Aberdeen has built its reputation, built its economy on oil.
Yeah, no, I don't see it as a tricky situation at all, because everyone in Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland recognises the fact that we need to be in a situation where there's the jobs of the future. The North Sea Basin is a declining asset. We were told that, of course, by the Unionists back in 2014, that we wouldn't be able to get any benefits from it. So we know that the future in 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years is not going to be what it has been in the years prior to now. So we need to plan for that future. And if we don't plan for the future, that's the biggest danger for Aberdeen in the northeast, but we're not willing to let that happen. We want to have that investment in green technologies to make sure that people in my constituency and across Scotland have benefits from the vast renewable resources that we have.
Gareth, thank you for that question. Let's go to Joseph in Swindon. Hello, Joseph.
Hi, Ian. Good evening. The question I would really like to ask, I was just listening. I'm not Scottish, not British, but just some curiosity I want to ask. When independent Scotland in the EU, who will negotiate the border or the border between the rest of the United Kingdom and Scotland when Scotland is in the EU? Will it be the Northern Protocol all over again? How will you go about doing that?
Well, I hope we wouldn't end up in the stooshy that we've ended up in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. The important thing to remember about the Northern Ireland Protocol, of course, is that businesses in Northern Ireland have actually benefited from having access to the British market and indeed the European market, something which isn't spoken about a lot in Westminster but is obviously patently true. I would like to think that we and the UK government could come to an agreed solution in relation to the hopefully lack of border that would need to be put in place on these islands, but it's an important question and one that we're going to have to address in the years to come.
But we will need a definitive answer on that. It's a bit like the currency question as well. It's by no means certain that Scotland could continue using the pound. I know I know what you're going to say. I've heard it from Alex Salmond. I've heard it from Nicola Sturgeon. But it does. I mean, the UK government, the Westminster government, in the end, would be the arbiter of that.
So in relation to the financial situation, the currency situation going forward, we've been very, very clear. It pains to be clear on this. Indeed, it was a big part of the economy paper that in the first instance, Scotland would continue to use the pound, as indeed anyone can use any currency, when the Bank of England would be the lender of last resort. We would then seek, once we hit, I think it's 3 checkpoints, to introduce Scotland's own currency with Scotland's own central bank.
Bring back the groat.
You're a little bit older than me, Ian, so I'm honestly no idea what you're referring to there. But I'll Google it afterwards and see if it's relevant.
Feel free. But in the end, this is one of those things that it is out of the hands of Scotland, isn't it? Because if you want to rejoin the European Union, part of the deal is you do have to join the euro.
So we're going to have good faith actors, both in relation to Scotland's relationship with the European Union, but also Scotland's relationship with the rest of the UK. And this comes back to my earlier point in relation to the importance of those relationships with members of the UK Parliament who come from different parts of the United Kingdom. And what we can't have is a repeat, like I said, of the stooshy that's happened since Brexit. And I see Leo Varadkar has been quite open about the fact that mistakes have been made. I've not necessarily seen the same rapprochement from the UK government, but we would enter things in good faith, and I certainly hope that they would too, because it would be to all of our benefit. Of course it would be.
A text question from Jane, who says, is Stephen aware and really aware of the strength of anger of many, many Scottish women, and because the word women is used nowadays differently to include males? I have to prefix by biological women about the effect of the GRR on biological women and girls' rights.
I acknowledge the fact that there is obviously a disagreement in relation to this particular topic. It's something which has been spoken about in the Scottish Parliament for the best part of 6 years. It's been the most consulted upon piece of legislation in the short history of our Parliament over the course of the last 25 years or so. It's legislation which has received support from every single political party in Scotland's Parliament, which was passed by an overwhelming majority of Scotland's parliamentarians. I don't necessarily think we need to get right into re-debating a debate which has already happened. Scotland's Parliament has put this legislation in place. The debate now is whether the UK Parliament accepts our democracy or not. They appear not to, and that's of grave disappointment to me and of grave concern, because if they're willing to seek to overturn legislation from the Scottish Parliament in relation to this particular issue, what next?
Was there, in part, a plan here that somebody wargamed what would happen here
6 years in advance?
And well, no, maybe not 6 years in advance, but certainly, were you aware that there was a possibility that this could be vetoed by the Westminster government?
No. Someone put this to me the other day that it was all a ploy by the SNP to get the Constitution back on the agenda. There's 2 points there. Firstly, this was first spoken about 6 years ago, and if someone has managed to war game six years in politics, then they're doing very well for themselves, because if I look at last year in politics alone, you couldn't war game 6 minutes. But there's also a second point to this. The only reason this has become a constitutional stooshy is because Alistair Jack has decided to invoke a power that has never been invoked before. And if I may, I think it's because they're trying to throw some red meat to Tory bones in the northeast of Tory MPs, in the northeast of England, who are very concerned about their seat. So we can have folk likes of actually, I'll not name them. I'll not do them the discourtesy of that. But folk who want to have a culture war because they've got nothing else to talk about, because the UK government is in its dying embers, and whatever they can do to divide, they'll try.
See, I have yet to meet anybody who wants to have a culture war.
Well, yeah, I don't want to have a culture war either, but I certainly see many Tory MPs who do, not least, of course, the Home Secretary herself.
We'll leave that one hanging. 7:45.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 7:48 on LBC. Let me tell you who's on Cross Question after 8. We have Sir Martin Sorrell with us, founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital and founder of WPP, the world's largest advertising and PR group. Jackie Doyle-Price, the Conservative MP for Thurrock and a former Trade Minister, will be here too, along with Zoe Williams, columnist for The Guardian, and Richard Thompson, the SNP MP for Gordon and the party's international trade spokesman in Westminster. It's an SNP night on LBC tonight. Stephen... Are you being sarky? Stephen Flynn is with us, the SNP leader in Westminster and MP for Aberdeen South. Right, let's go back to your calls. Let's go to David in Victoria. Hello, David.
Hi, good evening. If Scotland does go independent, who's going to defend it? Are you going to create your own army, navy and air force, or what?
Yes. Sorry, you wanted me to expand upon that?
I would like you to expand on that because David, I haven't heard that before.
No, my colleague, Stuart MacDonald, he used to be our defence spokesperson in Westminster, put a lot of work into this. My colleague Dave Diggin has taken on the defence portfolio, is incredibly motivated to ensure that we have a clear strategy in terms of defence. The big thing, of course, is that we would seek immediately to become a member state of NATO, which I think is incredibly important, not just for Scotland, but for our allies on these islands and right across Europe as well, as we all seek to work together to combat the threats that there are. Scotland will be a keen and proactive advocate for cooperative security, and we'll do that through the prism of NATO working alongside our allies. I think that can only be a good thing, and I'm looking forward to that coming to pass.
You haven't mentioned the word nuclear.
No, I've not.
Because, I mean, that is a big issue, isn't it?
It's not a big issue at all.
Well, you have nuclear bases in Scotland.
Indeed. And those bases would need to be sited elsewhere in the UK should they wish to keep their nuclear deterrent.
But you want to be a member of NATO and use the nuclear umbrella but not pay for any of it?
Well, there's a number of nations within NATO who don't have nuclear weapons, of course. I think everyone is well aware of that. My position and my
Do you not think Ukraine rather regrets getting rid of its nuclear weapons?
I'm not going to get necessarily into that debate.
No, because it's an inconvenient argument.
No, because I don't think it's necessarily fair, because nobody seen a madman like Putin doing what he did, and the horror that he's put upon the Ukrainian people is unforgivable. In relation to our position, the world is not made safer by having nuclear weapons. In fact, the reason that everyone is so fearful of Vladimir Putin in relation to this conflict is because we do have a madman who has his finger on the nuclear button, and the damage that he could cause would be extensive. That's not an argument for nuclear weapons. That's an argument for him not having nuclear weapons. And I want to see a world where we.
Would you commit to spending 2% of GDP on defence?
I think it's. I've got many powers, but I don't think I can necessarily commit to that. I would like to see us do that if possible. I think that would send a clear signal that we're going to take this particular issue seriously. And I can only assure the listeners that we want to be a serious player when it comes to defence, working strategically with our allies. And I know my colleagues who are working on this specific brief have been at the forefront of that.
David, do you want to come back?
So yes, I think he's being totally disingenuous. To be a member of NATO, you requires to having forces. What is the population of Scotland? Where are these forces coming from?
Scotland has forces within it at this moment in time. Where did they come from?
Part of the British Army. They're part of the British UK forces. Scotland's independent, you'll lose them.
Where are those Scottish soldiers going to go?
You're not part of Britain anymore if you become independent, surely.
Yes, but we will still need forces to defend us. And
you have to
against
whom?
Forces. Against whom?
In the exact same way that everyone needs forces in order to prepare yourself for any event that could arise. Scotland, this is an important point. Scotland's sea border, in particular, is enormous. So we're going to obviously have to be in a position where we're able to defend that, and to defend that well, and hopefully working with our allies in NATO, we can do that.
So there's no question that you would still pool defence with the rest of the these islands, I should say?
Well, I think that would obviously be a discussion for post-independence, but I would like to see as close cooperation as possible. I think that would be in everyone's benefit. Yeah.
David, thank you. Eddie in Sheffield has texted to say, could you ask Stephen what plans the SNP have for Scots living in England and what will happen to our nationality?
In what regard? You'd hopefully become a dual national in the same way that people in Ireland, of course, are able to do that at the moment and travel freely between Ireland and Britain. I would like to see that replicated. I think that could be easily done with a bit of positive and proactive discussions between Scotland's government and the UK's government.
So in that case, as somebody who had a Scottish grandfather, I could be a Scottish citizen?
I think you would be more than welcome at any moment, Iain, to come north and settle down and become that Scottish citizen I know you want to be.
I absolutely want to be able to watch Dunfermline Athletic every week.
Nobody wants to do that.
Yes, they do. Let's go to, says the Dundee United supporter representing Aberdeen. Let's go to Joe in Murray. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Iain. I'm a little bit nervous this evening. Hello, Stephen.
Hiya, Joe. How are you doing?
He's very friendly.
Yeah, don't be nervous.
Okay. I think it's probably about time that you yourself, Stephen, and Nicola Sturgeon and everybody came clean about one of the reasons for this gender reform bill going through. And I up until now, I've been an SNP supporter and voter, but as you probably realise that for me and for many of us now, we can no longer vote SNP. So one of the reasons, and you know this, is that you wanted to split the independence movement because you don't want independence, really. You just want Devo Max. You can, keep your jobs and everything. And you've done a very good job. Well done. But you've sacrificed voters like me and women and children. You've sacrificed us, and I'm really, really upset about it.
Because there were one SNP minister resigned over this bill, didn't you?
Yeah, there was a few folk who voted against it. Yeah.
Well, you're not concerned about people like Joe? You've lost them.
I'm sorry to hear that, Joe. And like I said, don't be nervous asking us questions, even when they are slightly challenging ones. Firstly, to address your wider point, I very much believe in Scottish independence, and the sooner the better. I'll quite happily do myself out of a job in that regard. And like I said, the earliest possible opportunity should the people of Scotland afford us that. In relation to the gender recognition bill, I think I've been as candid as I possibly can be tonight in relation to it. Is something that I support, as something which I believe is a good thing. We're not seeking to divide anyone. In fact, we're trying to bring folk together to support one of the most marginalised groups in society, and I think that was replicated in Scotland's Parliament, where, as I've said, every single party that's represented within Scotland's Parliament had members who voted in favour of the legislation. The former leader of the Conservative Party in the Scottish Parliament, Anna Sarwar, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Alec Cole-Hamilton, the leader of the Scottish Lib Dems, and Lorne Slater and Patrick Harvey, the leaders of the Greens. Everyone was supportive of this legislation in terms of each members coming from each political party. It's only the UK government which now is seeking to overturn Scotland's democracy, which is exactly why we need independence.
When did you last speak to Nicola Sturgeon?
Oh, yeah, you're testing me.
That long ago?
No, I have lots of conversations. The other week.
Because, the other week, that covers a multitude of things.
It does. I've only been in the job a few weeks, so you'll forgive me.
You weren't her favourite candidate, were you?
Who says that?
Well, it's quite clear, because she put someone up to stand against
That's
you.
not...
Yeah, of course it's true. You and I both know that it's true. Well, it's equally as true as when the last time you were in the studio with me, you denied that there was any plot to get rid of Ian Blackford. And then, hey presto, 2 weeks later, out.
What are you inferring, Iain?
I'm inferring that you were agitating to replace Ian Blackford a long time before he eventually quit.
No, that's not a fair reflection of events. I know some folk are very interested, as indeed it appears you are, in these House of Cards.
Well, we like all the machinations.
Everyone does, but sometimes the reality is not as exciting as what people make it out to be. Iain, and just to be clear, me and Iain get on fab, always have.
You do.
And No, don't say it like that. We do. Well, we genuinely do.
Come on. He is not in the job now, and you are. And there was an article in the Scottish Daily Express yesterday, headlined, "Atmosphere in SNP's Westminster Group has turned sour. Support for Stephen Flynn rapidly declines."
You'll forgive me if I'm not overly concerned about the content of the Scottish Daily Express, the fountain of knowledge that it often portrays itself as.
You sacked your chief whip last week, didn't you?
No, Martin resigned.
He resigned, or he was resigned?
No, Martin resigned.
I mean, he didn't go very happily, though, did he?
Says who?
Says this article.
Says the Scottish Daily Express. Come on, Iain.
I mean, there's quite a few quotes in here. Your ship is not a happy one at the moment, according to this.
Look, according to the Scottish Daily Express, look, a little bit of friendly fire in politics is not a bad thing. It keeps everyone on their toes. Keir's not short of it. Rishi's not short of it. It appears the Daily Express, or Scottish Daily Express, think that might be the case. I'm quite clearly not overly bothered about what's in the Scottish Daily Express. My focus is on what comes next for Scotland, Scotland's future, making sure that our democracy is defended, that we get back into the European Union, and most important of all, Iain, that we offer people a little bit of hope, because times are tough right now, and we can do things so much better with the full powers of an independent nation.
I look forward to my Scottish citizenship.
As
Stephen,
you're more than welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader in Westminster. Well, my focus is now on the next hour of the programme, because it's Monday's edition of Cross Question. We have a top panel for you. We have Sir Martin Sorrell, advertising guru. We have Jackie Doyle-Price, former government minister, Conservative MP for Thurrock, Zoe Williams, columnist for The Guardian, and Richard Thompson, the SNP MP for Gordon and the party's internationals trade spokesperson. The lines are open, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, and you can use Alexa to submit your question. Just say, "Alexa, send a comment to LBC." And of course, you can watch us in glorious Technicolor on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Prime Minister's ethics advisor is going to investigate Nadeem Zahawi's tax dispute with HMR.